Hi, I'm Arthur. Sci-fi is one of those genres that a lot of people tend to gravitate towards, and honestly, I don't blame them, especially because I wouldn't have a job if they didn't. There's a lot of fantastical things you can discuss in the settings of the far future, and if I could give you a top 5 list of my favorite things, most of them would probably have something to do with sci-fi to some capacity. But what if I told you I fucking love fantasy? Probably as much as I love sci-fi, but me being me, I am pretty picky about these things. As much as I love Age of Sigmar, I gotta say the setting is really fucking lame, but the characters and models save it. I think Tolkien is alright, albeit a bit too slow moving for me. I do like George R.R. Martin, but that's because a lot of his works occupy that niche between low-level and medium-level fantasy work that my tastes line up perfectly with. Probably the closest I've ever gotten to the tabletop representing my perfect fantasy game would probably be, in fact, Warhammer Fantasy. A close second would be Argatoria, but we'll get there next week, I think, maybe. So, after getting the shit beat out of me by friend of the channel, but not me, Pancreas no work in a game of Warhammer the Old World, I'm going to start a small series discussing the factions and the setting of Old World to kind of steal from his market pool, I guess. Hope you guys like that. And also, I'm glad that my dwarf bolt thrower skewered like 20 of his swordmasters of Hoeth. The stocks of 8 peaks just peaked for the 9th time in a row, and Ulthuan, so far in the red, they look like the asshole of a squig with diaper rash. Yeah, just soak that one, and yeah, I'm sorry. So, where do we start with this? What is the best thing for me to start with? Easy. One of the first 2 factions re-released with the Old World's reinception. And if I had to choose between the noble class of Frenchmen who do nothing but push the pores to the breaking point in order to get as much out of their limited resources as possible, and the noble class of Egyptians who do nothing but push the pores of their society to the breaking point in order to get as much out of their limited resources as possible, while also being skeletons, I'm picking boners all day. Don't make this weird. Don't shut up. I know what I said. I'm not taking it back. Tomb Kings. Hell yeah. A faction I do not play because between my love for short people and skeletons, the short people thing is kind of closer to my heart. So with that in mind, Tomb Kings have always been on my short list of very interesting factions to discuss, especially in a setting that isn't 40k, and by God, we are going to do so. So sit back, relax, and make sure to tell Pancreas no work how funny it was when thousands of years of elven sword mastery was ripped away by a long pointy stick. So we're going to be talking about the lore, history, and some of the tabletop stuff involving the Tomb Kings, because I have faced them quite a few times in the Old World at this point, and yeah, I hope you guys enjoy. The Tomb Kings are a faction in the Old World as well as the modern day setting of fantasy. Not Age of Sigmar, they're not really there yet, I guess. It's weird, but yeah, but suffice to say they've been around for a long time, because if you didn't notice, the Old World and Warhammer Fantasy are in fact not taking place at the same time and are a couple hundred years in the distance, and there are still characters in the roster that you can choose from for Tomb Kings that are still playable in fantasy. So that just gives you an idea as to how long-lived these guys are. Because, well, one of the things that people tend to forget is that Warhammer Fantasy was based around a lot of history, as the original Warhammer was made by a bunch of history buffs who wanted to put some nerdy shit into their game. So there is a lot of historical analogs in the existence of this game. And one thing that a lot of people don't really think about or don't really recognize is what we refer to is ancient Egypt. Yeah, that lasted way longer than you guys would expect. The society we know as ancient Egypt for scale, so we are in the year 2026 right now. Let's take that number and put it back down to 1 year. Year one common era, or whatever denomination you want to use. Calm down. That's a long ass time ago, right? We have people who are using their archaeological abilities to determine what's going on in year 1. Anthropologically, it's very interesting to just study the people that existed back then. Well, go back another 1,000 years, and that's roughly how long ancient Egypt lasted. About 3,000 years. I could have said that in like a more succinct way, but I just wanted to put that in scale. So, in proper historical tradition, as well as fantasy tradition, the Tomb Kings, or whatever they were called before they ended up becoming skeletons, were one of the most long-lived societies in the history of the prehistorical setting there. With a strong reverence for death as well as the majority of their gods, there were going to be a few issues that cropped up, because you can only have a peaceful society, relatively peaceful society, for so long before weird shit starts to happen. See, the society of pre-tomb Tomb Kings was one of respecting the big dick on top. Whoever had the coolest hat was the dude you had to work for until he died. Then, if you were a little bit too close to him, as a servant or as a warrior or what have you, you'd be buried alongside him, alive, probably. Very cool Tomb Kings. Love the view of sand and the smell of mass starvation inside of a rocky room. These pharaohs and kings and queens and so on would be revered as close to gods. They would rule the people of Nehkara, which, oh shit, I forgot to say that. Yeah, the land that the Tomb Kings occupy is called Nehkara. It's a big desert now, but it wasn't back then. We'll get there. But yeah, they would basically rule Nehkara as the pharaoh, with varying degrees of intense cruelty or kindness depending on the dudette, or I don't know, a bug. But to say these fellers were successful was an understatement. The land that was owned by Nehkaran kings and whatnot stretched from where we know as, the desert of Nehkara all the way up to Lustria. Yeah, it's a lot of space to just control. They were a noble people who had a strong martial culture, but also a strong reverence for the gods. Now, the land was owned by Nehkaran kings, to give you an idea of as to how far that went up, they stretched all the way up to Lustria, which, if you know the map of the old world, that's pretty far, and if you don't, my lovely editor Alice would display on screen the locations of both Nehkara, the deserts, as well as Lustria. Yeah, that's a lot of space to just control, I guess. Well, they were a noble people who had a strong martial culture and a very strong military to boot. They also had a very deep, not really fanatical reverence for their specific gods. Each one of their gods was based off of, obviously, their Egyptian counterparts. Jaff is based off of Anubis, Bast is based on Bastet. I know you're not supposed to pronounce it Bastet. I do it anyway because it just sounds better than saying based. And Geheb is based off of Geb. The names all kind of have a similar structure to them, that if they couldn't think of a cool name like Jaff, they would just come up with something that sounded vaguely like the original name in the Egyptian pantheon. Yeah, whatever. Same shit, different pile is the quickest way of saying that. They were one of the most prosperous peoples in the known world, and because of that, obviously some weird shit started to happen at a certain point when you get enough money. So all the stuff we've been covering right now is the pre-tomb stuff for the Tomb Kings, so what led them to be the post-tomb Tomb Kings. Man, that's getting confusing to keep track of. Well, there are two different characters that we need to know that one leads into the other. The first one we're going to talk about and eventually circle back to is one that you guys probably know about quite a lot. That would be Settra the Imperishable. Now, that isn't his full name, as he has quite a lot of different titles, and I do not have the time to list them all off. Much like every other king before him, Settra was a bit of an arrogant sort, but what if I told you that this man was so arrogant, so egotistical, and so comedically petty that he demanded immortality because he wanted to rule for longer, and he got it. But he got pissed off because it wasn't exactly the most beautifying treatment that he could have received, and he wanted a solid gold body, and he didn't get that, so he punished quite a few people because of that. Yeah, being able to get what you want, but not getting the extra frosting was enough to set this man on edge and send someone on a forever quest to get him a golden body. That's really, really funny. I really like this man, and I feel like I'm making him sound a lot more like a looks-obsessed dweeb than he actually is. Oh no, don't trust me. There's going to be a lot of Settra glazing in this, because Settra fucking rules. Yes, the pun was intended. We'll get there. He is the definition of the idea of my way or the highway, but it's more my way or I kill you, your entire village, and then salt the earth where you were living and make sure that your entire lineage can never set up shop anywhere else. So yeah, let's talk about Settra for a little bit, because he's kind of important to where the Tomb Kings ended up. Where do we even start with this guy? Settra was one of the biggest and most important kings, if not the most important, in the entirety of the pre-Tomb Kings era, and even after afterwards, uniting his people against chaos, orcs, lizard men, I guess, and all sorts of other baddies, waging war against anything and everything that stood in his way. But the interesting part is that he actually was a pretty decent ruler. Kind of like Vlad the Impaler, as long as you didn't fuck with what was his or his people and did what he told you to do. If you were his people, you lived a pretty decent life with a great deal of prosperity. He was generous and kind, but he had a strong belief in the rules, as well as a strong reverence for the gods. He even went to one of the main temples in order to gain the approval of all 4 of their main deities in order to gain their blessing to be a proper ruler, which the funniest part is, yeah, he kind of was the best ruler in any of GW's properties, like not even just fantasy. He is a braggart, but when you're an 11 out of 10 male specimen like him, it's not really that hard to not be that. The dude had one major complex that was very similar to the one that Arnold Schwarzenegger probably had, and that was, well, if you ever told him that he can't do something, he's going to move heaven and earth to do it. Mostly because fuck you, but also because he wanted to live life without restriction, and for the most part he did. Though the thing about life is that it does end, so towards the end of his life, he dedicated a sizable portion of his wealth, resources, time, and so on to founding the Mortuary Cult, a group of individuals dedicated to researching and finding a way to surpass death, either through the purpose of immortality to start and then reviving the dead so that he could come back to life, because, you know, he was really at the end of his life at this point, and he wanted to come back in a solid golden body to some kind of paradise where Nehkara is the only nation in the universe. This mortuary cult is kind of the main religion that we know of the Tomb Kings going forward from here, as with their traditions being what they were, it led to interesting things. As the eons went on, their society became death-obsessed in the coolest way possible, mixing skulls and bone symbols with everything, gaining minor and increasingly stronger magical abilities that were able to prolong lives, protect bodies from decay, and even put life into massive statues, the necrolith colossi and so on, but nothing to ever truly surpass death. Then came along the second character we need to focus on in order to properly understand the most relevant things that have ever happened to the Tomb Kings to lead us to where we are, and that man's name was Nagash. Yeah, hold your applause. Nagash is kind of an important character, but we can't go too crazy with him yet. See, if I wanted to, this entire video could be about Nagash, but I'm not Pancreas No Work and don't want to do those kinds of propaganda videos, so this is just supposed to be a generic faction overview in case you guys wanted to get in, not a Nagash propaganda video. Colin already did that, so yeah, but I mean, if you want it, just let me know. I'll make a video about anything as long as you guys show the proper feedback. But yeah, in the mortuary cult, there was this long-standing tradition that the firstborn son of each noble family would be put into the mortuary cult as a priest who was responsible for learning how to raise the dead, learning how to use the magic, maintain bodies, so on and so forth, and the second born would become the noble to continue the royal lineage. This tradition was a kind of an affront to baby Nagash because Nagash is a prick, which is not going to be the last time we say that. See, Nagash was a lot like Settra, kind of a dark mirror type beat, where Nagash wanted to do what he wanted without any impediments, but unfortunately he enjoyed less wholesome things like taking care of your society, and those things included, but were not limited to, torture, kidnapping, murder, manslaughter, accidentally killing people, experimenting on corpses to see if he can make monsters that would serve him eternally. Yeah, power was kind of his main gain here, so he was gonna do what he could to take as much power as possible and not share with anyone else. This led to him taking some Dark Elf prisoners that were going through Nehkaran lands, saying he was going to execute them, and then just taking them to his secret pyramid death trap maze so that they could teach him magic, as elves in this setting are kind of responsible for most people learning the magic they did, and thus he became the beast he was now by, you know, torturing them about it for a while. So, the fun fact about these Dark Elves, from what my research said, is they're single-handedly one of the most important trio of barely named Dark Elves in history, as they're responsible for several other atrocities that have happened in the past, but that's neither here nor there. This is about Nagash. Nagash essentially locked them away in a pyramid and forced them to teach him everything they knew about death magic. And this was a really, really, really bad idea. But yeah, they taught him some stuff that was, not good, and he killed them for their troubles with said magic. With a few steps in between, he actually managed to make an elixir of immortality that actually made him functionally immortal, if my memory serves me correctly. No longer dying of age or really really anything outside of being, physically injured to the point of death. Now, this was literally one of the main goals of the mortuary cult, to surpass death in any capacity, so did he tell the rest of Tomb King Society? No, it's Nagash. He's a prick, so fuck that. He wanted it all for himself, writing some of the sickest works of romantasy in invisible ink in 9 books, but hiding it behind shitty old arcane scripture so that no one could see that he was a fan of A Court of Thorns and Roses. And I know I just flashbanged at least 2 of you. Though, because he had learned a lot involving death and soul magic, he actually transferred small portions of his spirit into each of these 9 books. Why? I don't know, because now only he could capitalize on the full power of them. Through a lot of his journey, eating warpstone and becoming eventually almost magically all-powerful, he ended up getting a lot of very weird things done to him, and with the assistance of the Skaven, which is never a term you should really get comfortable with, he planned to do something pretty damn bad, which was to kill everything in Nehkara and then also raise every dead thing in the world as a zombie, skeleton, whatever, to be the servant of him. This ritual was kind of a culmination of his powers and journey as a character. I am skipping over a lot. I'm not even covering the loss of his hand, the Skaven stuff, him stealing his brother's wife after killing his brother. If you guys want an entire video on Nagash, just I don't know, let me know. If I get enough comments about it, I'll do anything really. I know Old World isn't the biggest thing, but I kind of want to see if you guys like this. Regardless, the ritual to kill everything and revive them as undead servants was stopped at initially a cost too great to count, because Nagash being killed and the ritual being stopped, it was a lot of death, and Nagash ended up getting betrayed by the rats, the Skaven, because it's the Skaven, they do that. See, the problem now is that what seemed initially as a cost too great to count became everyone. The problem was the spell partially went off and killed every single person in Nehkara. Now you think, oh, that's kind of cool. Now there's a power vacuum in this empty, horrible desert where all life has been wiped off planet. Well, if you have eyes and notice all the skeletons on screen, the spell, as I said, took partial effect, leading to the inhabitants of Nehkara being revived as undying revenants. This was magically induced undeath as well, so it wasn't so much, oh, the bodies are afflicted with a disease that causes them to process after death. No, it was more like their spirits are now possessing their old dead bodies, and thus not much you can do to kill them outside of breaking them into so many pieces that the magic holding them together is stretched too thin and thus dissipates. Now we move into the era of the Bony Boys. I absolutely adore them. They have such a fun aesthetic, especially ranked up. They are now the Tomb Kings true and proper, as it wasn't just those killed in the magical Nagash nuke that were revived. It was everybody in Nehkaran land who didn't have proper warding on them. Hell, the bits and chunks that weren't fully able to make a body came back as tomb swarms, which is cool. The death-obsessed culture they had prior was a very decent fit for the army that they had become. Now, the kings and queens and rulers and other nobles of the era ended up faring a little bit better with, something akin to the gentle repose spell from D&D being cast on them and wards to keep them from rotting. Most of them still had skin, albeit they were a bit desiccated. It's a bit dry out there. The lesser individuals that were not mummified ended up just coming back as skeletons with random bones that might not be theirs all the time. That is most of what you need to know, I should know. This is all their backstory that's really relevant to understand what they are in the old world right now. I know you guys will correct me on a bunch of things that I got wrong there in the comments, but hey, I just thought I'd try something new, and I'm always down to learn. So let's talk about the Tomb Kings in the modern era and discuss what the nonsense is about, because the political bickering of modern Tomb Kings gives me life. But before we do that, let's talk about something that the Tomb Kings can no longer enjoy. A lovely drink. Dare I say, gamer Supps? You want to know something wild? I swear Gamer Supps comes out with flavors so fast, I don't know half of them when I go to the site to peruse my next batch that I want. I get updates routinely about what's coming out and what I should promote, but I logged in today and saw that not only was there a bunch of flavors that I didn't know about, but there's also a repackaged strawberry lemonade, which, for note, audibly, I said to my roommate about 2 weeks ago, I wish we got some strawberry lemonade Gamer Supps. So now I have to deal with the paranoia of not only being depicted as a soy jack if ever I I show my face, I have to worry about my house being bugged by gamer Supps, looking for info about what their next move should be. You know 'em, you love 'em. Gamer Supps is an amazing drink company with a great tasting list of products from energy drinks, sports drinks, sleep aids, and God knows whatever dark and twisted else. I vouch for them, as for the most part I do drink some gamer Supps at least once a day, mainly because of how tasty it is, and also because I probably have a stimulant problem. And if you want tasty drink mixes at even more affordable prices, be sure to use code BONEZONE at checkout for 10% off your order. And also, some of the profits go to me, so you'd be helping out the channel as well as myself during these days. So thanks again to Gamer Supps, and let's get back to the Tomb Kings. Okay, so the modern culture of Nehkara is one of the funniest and most interesting things I've ever seen in a fantasy setting. See, with everyone in the history of the desert here coming back to life, you have the funniest arguments that could ever come about in an undead setting. So what do I mean? Well, look at the royal lineage. Let's pick someone out. Some dude, arrogant as he was king for over 50 years before passing away of natural causes. One of the longest reigning kings in the history of Khemri, Nehkara, any of that. Wakes up a corpse, kind of annoyed, but now that he's technically immortal, says to himself, oh, so it's time for me to take back my throne and take back the world and bring it to where I was when I was alive. Wrong, because his son also woke up, did the exact same thing, and was basically saying that he was the son of a great ruler, learned everything that he needed to from his dear old dad, and even though he ruled for 30 years, allegedly had a better reputation than his father. Then you have the great-grandfather of these individuals, who was pissed off that both his son, grandson, and great-grandson had spent most of their time as ruler undoing his laws involving his rather bizarre religious practices about how you can't touch other people's butts on Tuesdays because it's an unholy practice and the gods are most active on Tuesdays and you don't want to offend them by butt touching, obviously. So the people of his day thought that that was a good idea, so his children decided to undo that over time, I guess. So you have these intergenerational bickering matches between families, as well as the numerous other royal lineages that branched off from the many children that many other kings and nobles had. And all of them have valid claims to rule over the lands, and they were all just complaining. So the mortuary cult decided to settle this dispute in the best way they know how, by waking up the one person who had the biggest nuts in life, who would at least partially make other people listen to him. You know him, you love him, a man so cool that literally the guy whose sole purpose is to read off just his titles for over 2 hours has a model that has killing blow. And if you don't know what that means, it means it can instantly kill models. Yeah, it's Settra, the
2 hours later,
who is now back and also pissed he wasn't made of gold. First off, banishing the idiot who woke him up to go and find a way to make his body actually gold that didn't involve paint, and then setting off to unite Nehkara and the various nations nearby, as well as conquer as more new territory as possible. He is usually pretty quick to unite people. As for context, in-game he is a level 1 wizard. Not because he's actually a level 1 wizard and studied it, but because other people were wizards, and that would imply that other people can do things that Settra can't, so he just willed himself into the position he is now. So you're not going to say no to him. I can guarantee you are not. Fun fact, if you decided to bend the knee to Settra, you would be given leniency and even able to prosper under his rule. But if you said no, then the rulers of your land had their skulls harvested and used as catapult ammunition for the next person who would say no. It's fired from these catapults that the Lich Priests actually curse, which, by the way, Lich Priests are the main religious magical figures of the mortuary cult. They curse these skulls to burn in agony and scream at the top of their lungs when being sent flying towards their target. Thus, this is where the name Screaming Skull came from, and that's why there's a paint called Screaming Skull, because it's bones. Neat. Learning is fun. But yeah, Settra has, to some degree, by the time of the current setting, united most of the people of Nehkara under his banner, and there is a relative peace there, as they are obsessed with rebuilding what was lost. There is a class of undead in the Tomb Kings known simply as a necrotect. Their job was to maintain the walls, the statues, and various necro constructs that the Tomb Kings had made in life. Kind of a funny thing to think about them in this way, but apparently when they they all started to wake up, they entered a constant state of perpetual misery and anxiety as all their works are now just kind of eroded away Ozymandias style. And because of that, they're just constantly working to rebuild everything, but because there's no more trees or any living vegetation in the area, they just make things out of sand, bones, dust. It's pretty cool. Good times. The current culture of the Tomb Kings is weirdly not evil. A lot of people say they are horrible, evil monsters, but no, they are just a strongly religious individual faction that really appreciates reverence to their gods, as well as ancient and archaic rules that modern folk might not understand off rip. They have shops and merchants and even conduct trade with other races in the setting. Now, don't get it twisted, their land is their land, and if you show up uninvited, you're just as likely to get torn apart by a wandering tomb scorpion as you are to be given a warm welcome by some skeletons with fruit baskets. Also, if Settra asks you to do anything, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you do it. Settra is not to be denied, even if you are on great terms with him and on the other side of the planet. They are a bit of a secluded faction with grudges against each race depending on where you go. Neferata absolutely hates vampires, but she isn't in the tabletop game at the moment, so I guess there is that. She'll probably be back at some point, because, I mean, the Tomb Kings, they're immortal. They'll just come back at some point. I know that Settra has a bit of a grudge against Chaos for the time that they stole his really cool hat, and he basically went from what was essentially ancient Egypt to Norway on foot to kill every single person in a straight line until he found the dudes who stole his stuff. Because, fun fact, if you're a magical skeleton, you don't really need to worry about the cold. Hell, the hard-headed dwarves tend to get into debates with anybody who would show them any level of slight on either side, and thus could erupt in a war because the Tomb Kings are pretty obstinate in their own ways. They are one of the most versatile factions to play, don't you know, in terms of the narrative. The lore of them allows you to kind of field whatever army you want. So, to talk about them on tabletop now that we're kind of doing that little transition, there's one thing that you guys need to know. Orcs and goblins? Oh, those are a horde army. Beastmen? Oh, that's a bit of a horde army, especially if you're in an Ungors. They're just unarmored masses of naked beasts running at you. Warriors of Chaos? They can be an elite army if you run Chaos Knights, but they could be a horde army if you run nothing but Marauders. But if you're gonna play Tomb Kings, in comparison to those armies, they might as well be an army of elites. Your basic core option is the humble skeleton, and you're going to need a lot of them. They can come in mounted form, with bow and arrow, spear and shield, sword and shield if you're really trying to save on points. Yeah, so, skeletons. Skeletons are 4 points each. Most games I've ever seen are between 2,000 and 3,000 points. So good luck, and you're going to have a lot of skeletons on the board. They are terrible, but you're going to basically throw as much bodies at a problem as humanly possible, and eventually it's going to work itself out because you can also revive these guys with your other magical caster guys. There is a certain level of fun and warmth that you feel in your heart when you're fighting a larger point game and the high elf army is bringing like 50 minis at most and you're scraping by at about like a respectable 300. It does feel nice. It's still kind of expensive, I mind you, but it's easy to pick up, easy to paint. All you really need is Xandri dust and a sepia wash and you're set to go. There are pricier options, obviously, in terms of points, like bone dragons, wizards, the necrolith constructs and all that, but you're gonna at least have a bunch of cheap units on the board. So, if you like the lore of the Tomb Kings, the idea that your characters are going to be around for quite some time because they're more or less immortal, and you like easy paint jobs, then the Tomb Kings might actually be for you. I'll stick to my dwarves because I like guns and making Pancreas No Works army die. And also, speaking of, if you're gonna play Tomb Kings, reminder, they're incredibly weak to fire. Like, if I shoot you with a burning arrow, I'm going to kill 3 guys. It's kind of messed up. Anywho, let me know what you think about in the comments about this as a potential series. I do kind of want to cover more old world content because I do enjoy rank and flank from time to time. I've been playing a lot of it recently and been painting an uncomfortable amount of miniatures. But yeah, I want you all to let me know in the comments what you think of the old world and what you would like me to cover next, because I'm just going to cover all the factions and then go from there. So yeah, like and subscribe as it would make me smile and keep the channel stable. Special thanks to my channel members for supporting me. With your help, I am able to do this and survive, which is kind kind of cool. I'm also able to support my editors and have them live a survivable and healthy life. I love doing this for a living and would not be able to do so without your guys' support. So thank you. And thank you all once again for watching. Till next time, I hope you all have a wonderful night.
Oh, and Settra is cool because Settra does not serve, Settra rules. Because when the god of the dead has you literally in his hands, you might as well go out by flopping your nuts in his palm.